Okay, we got through the hard part. Now some of this is going to kind of like apply some of what we learned in the first section. So when all of this, like all the muscle fibers contract in concert, you get a muscle contraction. The contraction produces muscle tension, and you move something, you lift something, you move your bone, whatever. There's two different types of contractions. There's isometric and isotonic. You might have heard of these. So isometric is when there's no shortening, so the muscle is contracted, but the length is not shortening. And then isotonic is normal, like when it shortens. So you can contract your muscle, but not shorten it. Often when you're injured and you do physical therapy, they're going to start you on isometric contractions first, and then do isotonic, where you're actually shortening your muscle. Okay, so the force and duration of your contraction can vary, so it's adaptable to what your needs are. One motor unit is like that, what we looked at in the last part, the nerve to muscle functional unit of one nerve connecting to the muscle fiber. That's called a motor unit. And it has a motor neuron. So if it's a neuron that connects to a muscle, that's a motor neuron. And then the muscle fibers, and there's multiple cells within that. Many fibers make a cell, and it's all spread out in a cylindrical cell. So here's like one motor unit connecting to a few different muscle fibers. And this is what it looks like in real life. So they can kind of branch off and connect to several. Okay, a muscle twitch is when your muscle's responding to one action potential. And this is when it just has a really quick contraction. And it's really fast. It's not like a sustained contraction. And you can see that with a myogram, which is a test where you can see the muscles contract. There are three parts to a muscle twitch. You have the latent period where there's no muscle tension. Then you have the period of contraction when you have the cross bridge, and then period of relaxation when the calcium returns to the sarcoplasmic reticulum. It's very fast. The muscle contracts faster than it relaxes. So the contraction is just lightning fast. So here is your latent period where there's no action potential yet, and then contract, and then relax, and relaxation takes longer. So that's a myogram that shows you the contraction of the muscle. It depends on what muscle is doing the twitch. So like eye muscles are going to be really fast. You might have had twitches in your eye muscles when you're tired. Larger muscles are going to contract more slowly. So here's a comparison. This is your eye muscle, your gastrocnemius, and your soleus. And the bigger the muscle, the longer the time. And this is in milliseconds, so this is still really short. Like I don't think you would really notice the time difference. Okay, normal muscle contractions are slower. So usually like something's wrong with your muscle if you're experiencing muscle twitch, but normal muscle responses can vary, but they're longer. And they can like determine what type of muscle response based on the frequency and strength. So a single stimulus will cause a single response, like a muscle twitch. So here's individual twitches here, contraction, relaxation. And then you can have a wave summation where it's like one right after another. They don't fully relax in between. So it's more of a sustained contraction. And you have even more calcium, like in the second contraction, you have even more calcium released. So this is what it looks like. So you can see like additional stimuli, they're going to cause this wave pattern. Okay, and then muscles are going to respond to stimulus frequency. So like how many times they are stimulated. If you keep stimulating the muscle, it's going to reach like a maximum, and you're going to have continuous contractions, and that can result in like tetanus, where the muscle just keeps contracting and doesn't release. So here's unfused tetanus, and then finally it relaxes, and these are all stimuli. Okay, and you can also have fused or complete stimulus. This can lead to muscle fatigue because the muscle does need to rest in between, and you need to recycle that calcium, and the myosin heads need to release, and all of that. So that's what that looks like. That's a fused tetanus. And this doesn't mean tetanus like the disease. This is just where your muscle stays contracted, but tetanus is a disease where your muscles are staying contracted. So, okay, when you are when you're stimulating multiple fibers of muscles, so multiple motor unit at the same time, like little synchronized swimmers, that's called recruitment. So when a bunch of muscle fibers in a concerted effort are contracting. There's different types of stimulus. There's subthreshold, where it's not quite enough action potential. It doesn't reach a threshold, so you don't really have a muscle contraction. Then there's threshold, where it is enough and you have a contraction. And then maximal stimulus is like maximum, every single motor unit is engaged and every single one is contracting. Because you can have like only some of those fibers are doing the thing, not all of them. Some are just sitting there along for the ride. So here's like what that looks like. So like nothing's happening here. Like it did not reach the threshold to cause the muscle contraction. So none of those little fibers are contracting. Here, you just barely reached it. There's a couple. And then as you go up, like in these, all of them are contracting. Okay. So recruitment works on size. The smallest fibers go first because they're easier, and the larger fibers go last. And the larger ones are used for powerful contractions. So if you're just like weakly contracting your muscle, you're going to use the smaller fibers. And then if you really need a lot of oomph, you're going to use the larger fibers. They can contract asynchronously. Some will rest while others will contract. So some are like moving, but they're not actually like doing the thing. They're not, the myosin head is not grabbing the actin. And so they're kind of sharing the load. So here's the small ones, medium, large, like this makes sense. If you need the large ones, then those are going to be recruited. Okay, muscle tone means that like all the time or most of the time, your muscles are like pretty much a little bit contracted. Like when you're sitting at your desk, the muscles in your back are engaged and contracted, and it's not like a hard contraction, but they are holding up your body. And that's important. So that keeps our muscles firm, healthy, and ready. They're all kind of working, like they're all busy, even if you're just sitting there or lying in your bed. Okay, so for isotonic contractions, those are the ones that I told you were changing in length. So that's like your typical muscle contraction where they're getting shorter. They can be concentric or eccentric. Concentric means the muscle shortens and works, so you're like picking up a book. Eccentric means the muscle lengthens and generates a force. So if you're laying a book down, but it's still applying a force on the book, that's eccentric. So let's see. This is showing a concentric isotonic. So the muscle is applying a force and it is shortening. And so here's isotonic. We've got tension and it reaches a peak here. And this is the length of the muscle. So as tension increases, muscle length decreases because it's shortening. Isometric is when you're not shortening or lengthening your muscle, but there is tension on your muscle. A lot of the mechanism, like of what's going on in the motor end plate, is the same on both of these, except for isotonic, the actin filaments are moving, but with isometric, both of them you have cross bridges. Like both of them, the myosin is binding to the actin. But with isometric, the actin isn't actually moving. Like it's binding and holding, but the actin is not moving and causing the sarcomere to shorten. So this is an isometric contraction. It is contracting, but it's not shortening. So the length stays the same, but there is tension. Okay, ATP is what provides energy for contractions, and that's what causes it to detach from the cross bridges. And so you need tons of mitochondria, lots of glucose and oxygen to get your muscles, like you need to breathe when you're exercising to get your muscles the oxygen it needs. So there's 3 mechanisms that the ATP has to do to work. So you phosphorylate the ADP. That means you add a phosphate to the ADP. ADP stands for adenosine diphosphate, and ATP is adenosine triphosphate. So you're going to add a phosphate to that molecule, and it'll make ATP. There's also an anaerobic pathway when you don't have enough oxygen. That's what anaerobic means. And that's going to cause glycolysis, which is glucose being ripped in half and then producing lactic acid. And then there's an aerobic pathway too that creates the ATP. And aerobic means it uses oxygen, breaking down glucose. Okay, so direct phosphorylation of ADP. So you have this enzyme called creatine phosphate. It's in your muscle fibers, and it adds a phosphate to the ADP to make ATP. So diphosphate to triphosphate. So here that is, you're going from diphosphate to triphosphate. Okay, so the anaerobic pathway that produces ATP is kind of a backup pathway. It doesn't produce a lot of ATP, but it deals with glycolysis, which is breaking down glucose and producing lactic acid. So you only make 2 ATPs, which isn't very many. And this is because you have low oxygen, which is why it's called anaerobic. And you produce lactic acid, and that's what makes your muscles burn when you're working out and you reach that point where they start burning. That's because your cells have run out of oxygen and you're now producing lactic acid. Okay, so normally you need oxygen, but when it's not available, you have this backup pathway, and that's what's going on. Okay, and so lactic acid goes into your bloodstream, and then it's going to be recycled, and your body will get rid of it. Some people faster than others, but so anaerobic respiration makes very little ATP, 5% of normal, but it is fast. So you do make a really fast, low supply of ATP. Okay, so here is your anaerobic pathway, and you make a little bit of ATP, and you make lactic acid. There's no oxygen, and you get sore muscles. Aerobic respiration is where you make most of your ATP for your muscles to contract. It's slower, and it produces like 32 ATP, which is a ton. What you do is you break down glucose and use oxygen, and then it produces ATP. So here is that happens in your mitochondria. You probably learned about in biology. You can do it with glucose or fatty acids or amino acids. Those can all be broken down and made ATP, different pathways. You also make CO2 as a byproduct and H2O, but you don't make any lactic acid. So that's good. And it takes longer. Like lactic acid production is fast, and you get fast, low amounts of ATP. So when you are in sports, you can increase your aerobic endurance by doing light to moderate activity. And then you can also increase your anaerobic threshold. And like people who do this would be like marathon runners, and they can actually like slow down the anaerobic production and not make as much lactic acid. So when you are running right away, you're going to start making some ATP through anaerobic, and if you do short bursts of exercise, you're going to be more doing anaerobic. But if you do long, prolonged exercise that's not as like severe, slower, you're going to be doing more aerobic. Fatigue happens when your muscles keep getting stimulated and they get tired. Your muscles need a chance to rest in between to get all those chemicals like rerouted in the right place. So that's what can cause fatigue. And also you can get fatigue from low ATP or from too much magnesium. And that can affect the T tubules. And then also if you don't have enough glycogen to make your ATP. When you are exercising too much, your body can run out, your muscles can run out of oxygen, or you may not give them enough oxygen to return to where they need to be, to recover. So you need to make sure that you replenish your oxygen. You need to make sure that the lactic acid is converted. The glycogen has to be replaced. So you need, and that's sugar. That's a carb. That's glucose. And you have to be able to make more ATP. So all of this requires oxygen. And that this is referred to as oxygen debt, because after you use your muscles a bunch, you need more oxygen than you did before you used them. So that's considered oxygen debt. And that's it.